I was an Olympic lifting coach. I was trained to coach, but it was hard to do it for yourself. I knew what I needed to do, but until I got someone that was watching me and helping me, that's when I got a lot better. And it can really help you take your game to the next level. We see these high performers and there's a hustle mentality now, which drives me a little nuts sometimes, because you see these things online where it's like, if you want to be successful, wake up at 4 a.m, do this, do this, do this, do this. And the most successful people in terms of managing their stress, and really stress is, when I look at resilience, it's a combination of stress moments and recovery and balancing that throughout your day. And saying no is a big thing. I see this in athletics all the time. I talk to parents and their kids are playing 3 sports. They're in high honors classes. They're playing an instrument. They add more and more to their plate. They're not necessarily able to handle it. And children, kids, teens are not necessarily tiny adults. And I think sometimes we treat them that way, where it's like, we have different capacities to handle these stressors. And I think that's something that as parents, we sometimes forget. There's a lot of things going on. Like, think back to when you were in high school. What caused stress is very different than what causes stress to me now. Like, I look back and I'm like, man, if I knew what I know now and went back, it'd probably be a little different. LeBron James, but I think he spends over $1 million a year on his body. And that's recovery. It's taking care of yourself, and it's becoming more mainstream. I mean, you're seeing a lot of the research on sauna, cold plunge, a lot of these recovery tactics that people are starting to do, but it's a balance. If you recover too much, you're not going to get better. And if you push yourself too much without recovery, you're not going to get better. You need to find that middle ground where it's a perfect balance for you.
What have you found for your own personal life, the key ingredients to maximizing your own potential?
Man, I would have to say it's the ability to be forgiving of yourself. I see in athletics all the time is the fact that we want to be perfect all the time, or we see on TV, we see these professionals that look perfect all the time, but we don't see behind the scenes. We don't see the failings. We don't talk about the failings. And it's the ability to be forgiving. I was never the kid that knew what I wanted to do with my life. I had friends that were like, I want to be a doctor, and they're doctors now. I want to be a lawyer. I was unknown. I mean, I went to the University of Maine for 2 weeks. I was in their engineering program, decided it wasn't for me and stepped out. And then I went to a small school in Erie, and then I transferred to a school in Florida. I dropped out. I had 10 different majors, and I remember sitting down with the dean when I came back, and he's like, let's just pick a major that gets you out here the fastest. And I got out. I ended up working for the Tampa Bay Rays in 2008, the year they went to the World Series for the first time. And I thought that was it. I'm going to work in professional sports. That's it. I actually got to carry the American League trophy on the field when we beat the Red Sox, which was a fun moment. And then I went back to school, got my master's in exercise physiology. I did a lot of training with youth athletes. In doing so, I remember parents coming to me and saying, I don't know what you're doing, but my kids are doing better in school. They're more motivated. They're less sassy. Like, what are you doing? And at that point, I really didn't know. So I went back to school and got my doctorate in psychology and really focused in resilience, perseverance, and motivation. And it just helped me seeing that kind of mind-body connection in sport. I think sport teaches that. You can do everything right and still lose, and the outcome's not what you want.
Give yourself that window of grace. High performers don't do that. We do function a lot in the literal of all or nothing, on or off. There's no middle ground. And that's a very stress-induced place to be because, like you said, you don't highlight the micro wins.
Exactly. It's something I like to I've always kind of call it like mastering the moment. Like, you have all these moments throughout the day, and you have the opportunity to win these small moments. And it's unrealistic to think that you're going to win them all. But if at the end of the day, I win more than lose, that feels pretty good.
Well, Dr. A, you've already dropped, I'll say, moments here. So we're mastering our moments to maximize our performance. I think that's a good title. All right, you Coaching Corner fans, as I always say, we got another good one for you today. Dr. Alex, we're so happy to have you. We're going to talk about a lot of things. It's going to be engaging, insightful, maybe a little humorous on this conversation. So Alex, would you mind introducing yourself and telling a fun fact about yourself?
Yes, my name is Dr. Alexander Chriest. A lot of people call me Dr. A. I am originally from Pennsylvania, live in Denver now. The sun is not cooperating, but this Broncos Stadium is right behind me. And I've lived in Denver for 3 years. I guess I'm a COVID transplant. I don't know if that's fun or not, but I guess the most fun is I have a 13-month-old daughter. So that's a new addition to the family that has really tested the lines of resilience becoming a new parent. So I would say that's probably the most fun I've had in the last, year and a half, a little over a year.
When you think about resiliency, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
Adaptability, the ability to adapt in the moment. Resilience is a word you could define a number of different ways. I mean, depending on which kind of scope you're looking at or which line of work you're in or what area you're in. But I think sometimes people think it's never failing or never giving up, but it's the ability to adapt to situations, learn from your failures, and draw from those experiences in future events.
What have you found for your own personal life, the key ingredients to maximizing your own potential?
Man, I would have to say it's the ability to be forgiving of yourself. I see in athletics all the time is the fact that we want to be perfect all the time, or we see on TV, we see these professionals that look perfect all the time, but we don't see behind the scenes. We don't see the failings. We don't talk about the failings. And it's the ability to be forgiving. I mean, being a new parent, I wear every fitness tracker known to man, big into sleep. I think that's a huge thing with resilience as well. And I used to just be so gung ho on, I want to be in the green. I want to be in the 90%, and being forgiving, allowing yourself to have a bad day, a bad moment. It doesn't define you, but it's how you bounce back from that begins to define you.
I was looking at some stats, and one thing that is still alarming in 2024 is that a third of Americans are in extreme stress mode. And of that, half say that they have increased stress over the last 5 years. So basically, since COVID, we've been increasing in stress ever since. It's a real thing. It's something that many of us still don't know how to navigate and cope. What are your thoughts on those stats, and how do you help people navigate stress?
Yeah, I think COVID became a scapegoat in a lot of ways. I think people were overworked, pushing themselves to the extreme before COVID, and then COVID came and there was a big change and that derailed them. So that was the tipping point. But I like to think of stress as this big pot, and we just keep putting things in it, keep putting things in it, and it's not till it boils over that we see the burnout or our negative stress response. Oftentimes, we'll blame the event that causes it to boil over, but it's all the things that are going on throughout the day, throughout your normal day-to-day life. Your commute that happens every single day, your kids, your family. It can be good things we view as good or bad are all filling this pot. Exercise, the project at work, your kids, your family, your sports teams, as we talked about, can add a lot to our stress pots, so to speak. And unfortunately, it's that one thing that boils over. It's oftentimes not a huge event. You come home after a long day of work and the kids, the significant other all come and swarm you, and maybe you have a negative stress response. It's not them that cause you to have that response. It's the accumulation of everything all day, all week, all year.
I love that you brought that out. I'm going to use stress pots because I think we think that that big monumental moment was the cause of it. It's like, no, it was the constant slow burn. And this one thing is the last thing that revealed itself of how severe it was. But there were signs long before. Do you find any correlation between those who have higher stress to those who don't get as much sleep? And how do we fix that? How do we change that?
Yeah, there's a lot of research trying to figure out if high levels of stress negatively impacts your sleep or not sleeping negatively impacts your stress response. And it's a little of both. We all know how we feel when we are exhausted and don't get a good night's sleep. It definitely leads to more and more things that maybe normally wouldn't be a big deal might drive you over the edge. I was traveling the other day and someone was just tapping their pen on the little tray the whole time. And under normal circumstances, that's not a big deal. But when your pot's about to be overflowing, that's something that can really push your limits. And I think that's something to pay attention to. I think my emotional tipping points tend to get lower when I'm tired or when I'm overstressed, either one. So the biggest thing to do is, coming from the sleep perspective, is like just aiming to get a little more. I think sometimes we have this all or nothing mentality where it's, I either get 8 hours or I get 4. There's times in our lives where getting 8 is unrealistic. So maybe getting 4 hours and 15 minutes is a win for that night, and celebrating those small adjustments. And all or nothing, I think of it almost like a light switch. You're either on or off. We see this in athletics a lot. I'm either hitting the gym, I'm eating well, I'm sleeping well, or I'm completely the opposite. And I like to think of it as almost like a dial. What's a 10 look like? What's a 1 look like? And sometimes a night where things just aren't going your way, maybe adjusting that dial one notch is, like I said, just getting 15 minutes more sleep or giving yourself the opportunity to sleep more. It's not maybe getting 8 hours, but that helps us have the perception of complete control as opposed to just on off.
Right. And what I'm also hearing from you is give yourself that window of grace. High performers don't do that. We do function a lot in the literal of all or nothing, on or off. There's no middle ground. And that's a very stress induced place to be because, like you said, you don't highlight the micro wins.
Exactly. It's something I like to really, I've always kind of call it like mastering the moment. Like you have all these moments throughout the day and you have the opportunity to win these small moments. And it's unrealistic to think that you're going to win them all. But if at the end of the day, I win more than lose, that feels pretty good. We see these high performers and there's a tussle mentality now, which drives me a little nuts sometimes because you see these things online where it's like, if you want to be successful, wake up at 4 a.m, do this, do this, do this, do this. And the most successful people in terms of managing their stress, and really stress is, when I look at resilience, it's a combination of stress moments and recovery and balancing that throughout your day. And saying no is a big thing. I see this in athletics all the time. I talk to parents and their kids are playing 3 sports. They're in, high honors classes. They're playing an instrument. They add more and more to their plate. They're not necessarily able to handle it. And children, kids, teens are not necessarily tiny adults. And I think sometimes we treat them that way, where it's like we have different capacities to handle these stressors. And I think that's something that as parents, we sometimes forget. There's a lot of things going on. Like think back to when you were in high school. What caused stress is very different than what causes stress to me now. Like I look back and I'm like, man, if I knew what I know now and went back, it'd probably be a little different. A comment from a classmate or all these things can just derail you. And we just have to remember as parents how to be graceful for our kids as well.
Well, Dr. A, you've already dropped, well, I'll say moments here. So we're mastering our moments to maximize our performance. I think that's a good title. And it's just flowing really well right now. I want to take a pause. And I'm sure what everyone is experiencing, as I am, a culmination of a lot of challenges, a lot of ups and downs. Would you mind to dive a little bit deeper with us on your own personal story and how you've become who you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I was never the kid that knew what I wanted to do with my life. I had friends that were like, I want to be a doctor, and they're doctors now. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer. I was unknown. I mean, I went to University of Maine for 2 weeks. I was in their engineering program, decided it wasn't for me and stepped out. Then I went to a small school in Erie. I was physical therapy for a little while. And then I think I dove into theater and acting for a couple of weeks. And then I transferred to a school in Florida. I dropped out. I had 10 different majors. And I remember sitting down with the dean when I came back, and he's like, let's just pick a major that gets you out here the fastest. And I got out. I ended up working for the Tampa Bay Rays in 2008, the year they went to the World Series for the first time. And I thought that was it. I'm going to work in professional sports. That's it. I actually got to carry the American League trophy on the field when we beat the Red Sox, which was a fun moment. And then I went back to school, got my master's in exercise physiology. I did a lot of training with youth athletes. I had a company that I worked exclusively with high school, college age athletes. In doing so, I remember parents coming to me and saying, I don't know what you're doing, but my kids are doing better in school. They're more motivated. They're less sassy. Like, what are you doing? And at that point, I really didn't know. So I went back to school and got my doctorate in psychology and really focused in resilience, perseverance, and motivation. And it just helped me. Seeing that kind of mind-body connection in sport was really fun. So I worked for a company for a while that started in the sports world and then transferred into more of the corporate setting, corporate military, law enforcement. And that company, it was called the Human Performance Institute, closed down right before COVID. And during COVID, started a company with a few people, got that going. We worked a lot with like the intelligence community, the government, a lot of military, and a lot of Fortune 100 companies. I just sold my shares of that company so I could be home more with my family. So kind of doors open to some new adventures now. And talking about resilience, it's always scary. Like the unknown, I think, is one of the things that can cause some bumps in your road in terms of what you consider resilient and not. That's really where I am now. So lived in Denver for the last almost 4 years. In that time, got married, bought a house, got a dog, and had a child.
I feel like you've completed the Thanos gauntlet right now.
And I think that's the thing when we talk about stress, like I think we have this idea of how things are going to happen. No one necessarily tells us how that comes together, but between your parents, your community, society, you kind of have this, you map out this plan for yourself. And it's all good when it's going that way. But once you deviate, that can cause a lot of angst and stress. When I was younger, it was always the thought of I was going to go to college, graduate in 4 years, get a job, save for retirement, get married, have kids, in that order. And 2 weeks into my college career, I dropped out. From that moment on, I just had a lot of stress and anxiety from my path not being the one I planned. And going back to my definition of resilience is adaptability. When things don't go as planned, how are you going to adjust and course correct in the moment? That's why I love sport. I mean, I grew up playing sports, baseball, hockey. I played a lot of rugby in college. That's where I really kind of thrived. I think sport teaches that because in a lot of ways, you're not going to be perfect. You can do everything right and still lose. And the outcome's not what you want. You see a lot in individual sports. I always feel for these tennis players and these swimmers that are in individual events where it's all on them. But team sports, you have the ability to be picked up by your teammates. But that's just why I love sports. You have the ability to learn so many life lessons.
Yeah, sports translates so well in the psyche of just how do I apply my life in these moments? Not that we're trying to put so much pressure on these athletes, but I want to go back to the point which I'll call like phantom pathways, if you will. We create all these phantom pathways of how we expect our life to go, how we expect the timelines for these results to happen. And they may not be concrete data, they may not be, but they're real to us. And then when it's not that literal timeline, that literal result, many of us crumble because we're in shambles. Now it's real. This isn't our false reality no more. This is real reality of like, wow, how do I navigate this now? How do I make a move now? And I always tell people this. Sometimes people spend so much time making a roadmap that they don't invest in building a GPS. With the roadmap,
Exactly.
you create based off set parameters, nothing else, and you're not, to your point, adaptable. With the GPS, you're constantly evolving, adapting based off the current scenario, situation, traffic, weather, all those things. And I think we need to learn how to embrace that more. But to your point, also, we don't spend enough time doing the deep work to one, understanding ourselves, and two, being willing and open to adapt. What if this doesn't work? What if this doesn't go according to plan? Not that we got to have a million scenarios for every single thing, but I think it's healthy to have that understanding of, especially in sports with athletes. What if you don't win the championship? What if you get injured? What then?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I go back, there was a player on the Rays in 2008 that never started a game in high school. And then he made it to the big leagues. Like you don't hear that story. And then last night we were watching the World Series and Mookie Betts, his parents named him, I don't remember his real name, but his initials are MLB. So you hear these stories of like, wow, the parents willed it into them and he just magically made it to the MLB. Like that's doesn't always happen. And I think sometimes you see this and think that it's going to come easy, but we don't see all the work that goes in behind the scenes. And I think one of the reasons I got into what I got into is when I worked in baseball during spring training, you had all these call ups, these AA players, AAA players that weren't even big leaguers yet. And you'd watch them in practice and they looked no different than Alex Rodriguez, Derek G. They looked in batting practice, they hit home runs, they field the ball perfectly. But as you get higher and higher in sport, the skill levels are closer and closer. But it's the mental moments. Like what makes you step up in those under pressure in situations when it doesn't go perfect. I read a quote from Roger Federer the other day that said that he lost almost as many points as he won. Arguably one of the greatest tennis players of all time. And he lost almost as many times as he won. You look at baseball, like a 300 average is amazing. And that's failing 2 out of 3 times. But it's the ability to bounce back, be adaptable when things aren't going well, not getting in your head. And when things are continuing to go bad, every day is a new day, and not getting too caught up in the stats, the media, what's said on social media. I mean, that's a whole other world that I didn't have to deal with when I was growing up. That I can't imagine what would happen if I would have had to search my name on Twitter or X and find all the positive and negative things coming from all around the world. So these athletes just have a tremendous amount of pressure and a lot of things that can cause anxiety that can be tough if we don't train ourselves to handle the stressors. And it's something we don't teach in school. We teach a lot of things, we learn a lot of things, and how to deal with stress, how to balance stress and recovery is just something we don't necessarily talk about. And it's something that I'm passionate about instilling in helping with children, helping with kids, helping with parents show up a little better every day.
For all you Fan Nation insiders, it was Marcus Lindbets. If you were like
That's it.
eager to know for MLB, which the chosen one, here it is. To your other point,
Yes.
I think the echoing of context matters.
Yeah.
I think people don't get, we list and we see these things, but when you add context, now I know how to look at it through your lens, through your eyes, or what you're experiencing. Because like you said, we have 5 generations now currently in the workforce. We have 2 generations now and one whole generation and a half who have now fully been engulfed in digital, where their validation is literally at the mercy of someone commenting on a post, how much engagement they get. In addition to all the pressures that most people have as athletes, you have additional pressures because the whole world can comment and validate you, the next chosen one, LeBron, or say you're a bust over one bad game, one bad moment. That is immense pressure that people sometimes forget or don't even acknowledge exists, and it's a genuine reality and fear. When you have people come to you as clients and things like that, is there like an onboarding process, or is there something that you start with to really get things going?
Yeah, it's really understanding the balance of stress and recovery. That's number one. And the word resilience has become a buzzword, and in some environments, it's almost become a negative because it was during COVID. Like, we need to be more resilient, more resilient, more resilient, without acknowledging like we're all resilient. Like, to get to where we are today, we've all had to overcome things. I think you always, again, going back to the social media thing, you compare yourself to other people, and it's like, well, I haven't been through that, so I'm not resilient. Like, we're all there. And sometimes just acknowledging that is step one. I mean, one thing that we focus on a lot, I focus on a lot, is just helping people understand that recovery is what that looks like. I think sometimes we think of recovery as like vacation, the weekend, put it off in the future. I'll recover on the weekend. I'll recover when I take a vacation. But we have these moments throughout the day, and teaching how we can recover in small opportunities, whether that be 1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, there's things we can do. And if we don't have a plan in place for that, the time will pass. I think of it like in the work world, it's like you have a meeting after meeting after meeting. If I have a minute between meeting 1 and meeting 2, it might take me a minute to think about, what could I do to recover? But if I have my go-to things, it's like sometimes it's just looking out the window and taking a few deep breaths. These small things, and the research is starting to catch up on this, the fact that these small micro recovery breaks throughout your day can help you perform at a higher level tomorrow and help you kind of refrain and prevent yourself from quote unquote burning out. Now, if you're burnt out, taking a minute break isn't going to help. It's the accumulation of all of these. And it's also this mindset. It's really neat to see the shift in the world. I think recovery is becoming more and more of a thing. But for the longest time, I used to work in the healthcare setting, and you'd see these nurses and doctors and be like, no, recovery is bad. It's a weakness. It's viewed negatively. And I can't let my boss see me taking a break. They'll think I'm lazy. They'll think I'm not a good worker. But, it's starting to realize that taking that minute, 5 minute, 15-minute break is going to help you perform longer down the road. It's not saying if I take a minute break, I have to work a minute longer. It's by me taking these recovery breaks, I'm going to be more focused, more intentional, and hopefully be able to perform at a higher level.
No, 100%. I think many times people look at someone and may think, I'm physically okay. That's good. They don't think about the emotional, the mental aesthetics of the things that they can't see clearly that may impact your performance. How do you guide someone who may have a misguided performance level? What they're trying to obtain, though we want people to shoot for the stars and the moon and all those things, maybe too aggressive for them in the current moment. How do you bring someone down to in their zone and their levels?
Yeah, I'm probably the opposite in a lot of coaches because I'm always talking aim low hanging fruit, take that first step. Because I think the problem, especially the trainings that I teach, people go through them. And it's like when you go to a conference or something, you get real jonesed up and you want to get going. And I've never taken a recovery break in my life. And now I'm going to say, I'm going to take 5 a day. I'm going to do this. And if you try to do too much too soon, what's going to happen is you may do well, but you might have a couple moments of failing. And then what tends to happen when we don't have those kind of routines set in place is we're just going to stop or start over. I see a lot like in the nutrition world. Sunday night, I ate bad all weekend. I'm going to eat perfect on Monday. And maybe you start off perfect. Breakfast I do well, lunch I do well, and then someone brings donuts in and I eat 4 donuts. And the logical thing to say, well, I had a bad moment. I'm going to get back on the horse. But the mindset is off. I don't know what it is, but in the nutrition world, we see this in a lot of new habit building. Well, I'll start again on Monday. Like we like these clean starts, like the new year, the new month, the new week. And if we aim too high, you're going to fail. It's going to happen. And then we wait again till the next week to start over. So again, going back to the dial, plan for perfect, plan for normal, and plan for worst case. So if I'm trying to take more recovery throughout the day, maybe perfect would be every hour I take a 5-minute recovery break. Realistically, I might be able to take a 10-minute break in the morning, 10-minute break in the afternoon. And worst case is maybe I take a 1-minute break in the morning, and before bed, I just take a deep breath. And so then even if you have a crap day, you have the ability to kind of find a small win. It might not be the biggest. And I think that's a hard thing. I mean, I fight this all the time. I'll work out if I have an hour. Well, I haven't had an hour to work out and I don't remember how long. Since having a baby, you find these small moments to find wins. And by aiming low, you're hoping to get a step closer to, like you said, aiming for the stars. But I think we're very good, and this goes back to my motivational research, is we're very good at setting long-term goals. It's easy to be like, man, I want to be a professional baseball player. I want to be a professional hockey player. Cool. What are you doing today? These short-term goals are where we get less clarity. Without those short-term goals, a day goes by and you're not any closer to your long-term goal. Another day goes by, and then it's the small things we do throughout the day. When we find 5 minutes, like, how do we seize that opportunity? I'd love to be able to work out for an hour, but man, there's 5 minutes. There's something I can do in 5 minutes to get better than I was yesterday. So it's these small moments and aim low.
Aim low, y'all. I think audience, listen, we're trying to calibrate things in moments. And the easy way is to do the long term because there's not much at risk. There's not much to be held accountable for. But when you calibrate in moments to what you're doing today, it's going to stack into tomorrow, next month, next week, next year, all that, then there's a little more responsibility and accountability. And we tend to avoid accountability, but we want the treasures and the rewards of it. And I think we need to figure out how do we navigate it just to put ourselves on that right path. I always tell people we are all mental athletes.
Yeah.
We all can have the caliber to whatever your zone of genius is, whatever it is that you want to do. There's going to be those peak moments where you have a choice. And you're either going to double down on it and prove yourself to go above and beyond what you think you're capable of, or you're going to sit and say, that's enough and I can't. Can you talk more about breaking through that final barrier, metaphorically speaking, if you will, on to achieving something you thought in your mind wasn't possible?
I always go look in the past. I mean, what's something that when you finish, you thought there was no way you could have gotten there? And it doesn't have to be in the same realm. Anytime you achieve something, you can pull strategies from that for the next time. I think of it academically. The first day of class is always the most overwhelming. You get the syllabus and it's like, here's what you have to do. You have to write all these papers. You have to read all these books by the end of the semester, and it's overwhelming. Like, if you look at it as a whole, it's always going to be overwhelming. Like, how do we break it down? When I'm trying to start a new project, sometimes it's creating the Word document and saving it. And that's a blank document is step one. It's always like, what's the first actionable step I can take in the direction? And then I think forward, and it's, clients I have that want to lose weight and they want to do it quick. And it's easy to say, like, yeah, I want to lose 5 pounds this week and then 5 next week. Well, let's focus on a pound a week. And that's not enough. And like, just think, if we go small, think a year from now, that's 52 pounds. Think of how big these small moments building up can be. But what tends to happen if we try to go too big? Cool, you might lose 5 pounds this week and maybe you do next week. What we tend to see in the research is then you fall back a little bit. Consistency is above all what we need. So if you're trying to achieve something big, I look at the GPS. Like, I know where I want to go. I know where I am now. What's the first step? Like, look at on the GPS, you have the steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Get to step 1 first. Don't overlook and think of step 10, but it's good to have that. Even in the GPS, we know the end goal. It's in the back of our head. But first and foremost is like, what's my next step? I need to turn left. It is just focusing on these small, consistent things that we have the ability. But it's not, I don't want to discredit having these high goals. With those long-term, high-level goals, we have to have these smaller, what's next step? What's next step? What's next step? Short-term goals. So we can get better every day, even if it's just a little bit.
And leading into sports, there's millions of examples. The greatest athletes in the world. How many reps did Serena Williams do every single day? Kobe Bryant with his layups every single day. Michael Jordan with his free throws. There's so much, to your point, inconsistency in those micro. Win the moment. We may not win the day, win the moment. If we ate 4 donuts, to your example earlier, okay, that was a moment which might have been justified. Don't ruin the rest of the day because you had a moment. The example people use all the time. How many seconds we get in a day? And you mean to tell me because you had a bad 100 seconds, you're going to waste the rest of the seconds in your day because of that? And we do that. Like you said, we had one bad moment, something failed, we didn't get our workout in, we didn't eat our protein bar, we didn't get enough sleep, we didn't do the habit we're trying to build or learn this thing we're trying to learn and exploring something new. And that shut us down the rest of the day. And we don't want that. We want consistency. And I think your psychological framework for us to understand and looking through the moments instead of our construct of days and different things like that makes time more viable to what we're trying to do and not such a restriction or a barrier, if you will.
One thing that always runs through the back of my head is, am I having a bad day or am I letting one moment ruin my whole day? We rarely have a day that's just every moment is bad, but it's all perspective. Oftentimes we see it through the world of one of these goes our last moment. So if I had a bad moment, like that's how I define myself. I remember working in the corporate world and it was the most money I ever made in a job. And I was very happy. For a year, I was happy. And then I went out for happy hour with a friend, a colleague, and he told me what he made. We did the same job and he was making significantly more than me. And all of a sudden, then I was unhappy. So for a year, I was perfectly fine with what I was making, what I was doing. And then you get new information and then all of a sudden it's miserable. And that's, I think, what tends to happen with social media is it's like, man, I had a great day. Then you look and you're like, well, he had a better day. He or she had a better day. And it's all perspective. And don't let some other information ruin how you're feeling.
I love how you brought that out. I think we need to sit with that and push the gas a little bit further. With current youth, current athletes coming up the ranks in high school and college, that is a reality. That is a very valid truth. How are there any other ways we can put that in its proper place, of course, but not give it too much fuel to flame and impact us so heavily as up and coming athletes, if you will?
Yeah, and I think set your own goals for one and focus on that. I mean, if my goal is to have X amount of yards or what goals or whatever it is in your sport, don't make it about being first. Make it being about what your goal is. I mean, you look at youth athletes. I mean, how many millions of youth athletes are there in the country? Focus on yourself. Like control what you can control. I can't control what someone else is doing in their world, in their league, in their game. I can control how I'm preparing, how I'm, getting ready for it and how I'm showing up. And the more we focus on other people, or the more control we're taking away from ourselves. And ultimately, that's it. We have more control than we think, but we can control our perception of things. We can control how we prepare for things, but I can't control how other people are performing. You see in baseball all the time. I mean, pitchers have to be resilient because they can make a perfect pitch and someone can hit it. You see it all the time. And sometimes, how frustrating is that? If you make the perfect pitch and this person bloops it in the one area of field that's not covered and it's still a base hit. Whether you hit it 100 miles an hour, or you hit it 30 miles an hour, it's still a base hit. And you can put it in the perfect place, but you just have to get back on the horse and what's next. You can control what you can prepare. When it does come time to perform, the outcome isn't what you want. What's next? You can only control your next step, your next pitch, your next throw.
Sometimes you're going to strike out Aaron Judge, and other times Freddie Freeman's going to hit a grand slam on you to win the game in the World Series.
Yes, if you face Judge in the playoffs, you might have a better chance of striking him out. But, it is. That's it. Freddie Freeman had, up until the World Series, was not playing all that great. I don't think he had an extra base hit in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, and then he goes off and hits a home run in the first 3 games of the World Series. Life is a series of sprints. It's not a marathon, it's a series of sprints, and you have the ability to bounce back. Again, sport teaches so much because you see these players that have terrible years, and then they come back and they get better. Cliff Lee was a pitcher for the Cleveland, then Indians, now Guardians, in the early 2000s, and he had some rough years. And then he had an off season where he's a big hunter and started doing like sit-ups and push-ups in his hunting stand and came back and won the Cy Young. And he was, as a Cleveland fan, he was a very frustrating pitcher for a few years. And then you have 2 bad years and you're getting frustrated and it'd be easy to call it quits. But you never know when that moment happens where it just clicks and the mental side of things kind of make things a little easier for you.
How do you see manifestation and momentum aligning in recovery and performance?
Visualization is one of the best things. You see it. I think it's something that happened a lot in sports, and now we see it outside of sports as well. Teaching in the intelligence communities and going into some of these areas, I had somebody tell me a story of someone that was a prisoner of war, and he said he visualized playing his golf course every single day. That's how he got through it. Like every day, he'd get up and he'd go hole by hole and play his golf game. And when he got out years later, he went and played that game, and he played a very good round of golf because of the mental side. Like it's such a powerful thing. And it's all about being realistic. I mean, I could go through and I can visualize myself playing golf and getting a hole in one every hole. Probably not realistic, but it's something that we can really prep ourselves for. I think of it like when I give a big talk in front of a big group of people, one thing I like to do the day before is to look at where I get on stage. I look where I'm going to be. Kind of helps you take some of the surprise out of it. If you walk into a room and you have no idea, a new field, a new stadium, and you've never been there before, it's more intimidating. So going back to controlling the things you can, check those things off the box. What can I do in advance to prepare myself for the game? Like I can't completely mimic the game, but I can visualize it. I can maybe do a simulated game. I can prepare to, and we all prepare differently. I mean, I've done these things where I look at what Tom Brady or LeBron James does, and I could try to prepare the way they do and not have the same outcome. I think in our line of work, like we become guinea pigs on ourselves, where it's like, oh, I read about a new workout plan or mental toughness training, and you try it, and maybe it doesn't work for you. And it's the ability to kind of recognize that and adjust in the moment. Because I could say, I'm going to get 10,000 steps a day. And mentally, I used to have that, but that's an all or nothing. Like, it's like, if I get 9,999, I failed in my mind of having to get 10,000 steps, but I'm still doing pretty good. So for me, like shifting the focus and just saying, what's my weekly goal? Maybe my goal is to get 70,000 steps in a week. So that takes a little pressure off if I have a down day. If I get 9,000 steps a day, but then I get 11 the next, I'm still on track. And it's funny when you can have the same outcome, but the way you break it up or the way you visualize it can help you achieve it differently. And I think that's it, is just being flexible.
You brought a moment back to me. I recently did a talk myself, and I think I've done like 30 for the year. And this is the one everything was leading up to this talk. And it was the worst talk I've ever had in like 4 years. I bombed it. The tech was awful, and it threw me off, and I just had a bad experience. And after it was all over, I was decompressed with another speaker who understand my flow of, I'm very energetic when I talk, and if I feel off, I feel off. And he's like, only you know the intentions of what you were trying to bring across in that talk. I guarantee you, everyone in that room had no idea the level of what you were trying to bring to. And probably compared to those who have never done a talk ever, you probably look like the most boldest, courageous person ever to get on stage and talk about whatever you talked about. And they probably thought you were an expert just because you were on the stage. Yes, we have our certain personal gauges of how we want things to go. But with the right perspective, the blow isn't as bad. You
Yeah.
kind of really give yourself more grace in that moment. And I think that's where that's where people come in, where we sometimes need outside sources to help us wrap our minds around our real perspectives. So what are the questions, or what is an ideal question that people don't ask you enough if they're coming to you as a client?
That's a good question. I would say it's just like, I think of it as like performance. Like a lot of what I do is people come, they want to perform better. So it's like, I want to perform better 100% of the time. Like that's what they want. They're not thinking recovery. Like all roads lead to recovery. And the more you get that piece of things, the better you're going to perform. They see it as like, I need to push, 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 push. It's like this grind mentality where it's like when you're working out, like your muscles are building when you're resting after a workout. You're giving it the stimulation during the workout, but that recovery is where you grow. Sleep's where you grow. And it's just, I want to make a point to your talk. I mean, you said you made 30 of them too, is like, don't wait for perfection. I think sometimes we get stuck in the planning phase and it's like, I will do this once all things are perfect. And if we get stuck in that mentality, we're never going to move forward. I mean, the first talk I ever gave it was probably in 2010, around that time frame. So it was 14 years ago. It was like my big formal talk. And I prepared, I rehearsed, I did everything. I thought I did perfect rehearsing. And the first feedback I got, he was awkward. He was weird. He touched his water bottle cap 137 times in the 30 minutes. But that sucked. but it helped move forward from there too. Like, I think not expecting not to be perfect right away. I think that's a hard thing too, is as high achievers, former, athletes, current athletes, former athletes, like, you want to be good at your trade, your skill, but allow yourself to be a beginner too. And I think that's the thing, is sometimes we don't want to do that. Like, if you want to get better at something, give yourself permission, give yourself grace to be a beginner, and that's going to help you get better. But I think sometimes we try to bite off more than we can chew. If I want to I've been getting into woodworking quite a bit, and you see these projects online. It's like, oh yeah, I want to do that one. If I were to jump too far, I'm probably going to fail too hard. In learning theory, there's something called zones of proximal development by Zev Vygotsky was his name. You have to take a realistic step to move forward. Like, if I jump too far and I'm trying something too advanced, I'm going to not be good in it and not see the potential or see the gain. But it's the baby steps. My daughter is trying to learn to walk. If she tried to run right now, she'd fail and probably not want to walk anymore. So it's kind of like, what's a realistic first step to take? So it's being a beginner. Don't check your ego and allow yourself to be a beginner. And that's going to help you be better in a number of things if you want to improve.
One thing that screams out to me was Simone Biles. And that's a perfect example of choosing to recover to increase your likelihood of performance later. And her big stand of, I'm going to focus on my mental health. I'm taking a break. And then we come back and see what she does. You would go, okay, awesome, bet. And to your point, I don't think high achievers don't consider recovery as a form of things that they need to do to increase and harness their performance. You can't always be on the go. You got to gas up at some point. You got to take a break at some
And
point.
it's getting better. I mean, LeBron James, but I think he spends over $1 million a year on his body.
Yes.
And that's recovery. It's taking care of yourself, and it's becoming more mainstream. I mean, you're seeing a lot of the research on sauna, cold plunge, a lot of these recovery tactics that people are starting to do, but it's a balance. If you recover too much, you're not going to get better. And if you push yourself too much without recovery, you're not going to get better. You need to find that middle ground where it's a perfect balance for you. It's different for everyone. If I were to go and do LeBron James workout, I'd probably risk injury, And just because you see it online doesn't mean it's good either. Seek professional help. Get a coach in whatever it is you're trying to get better at. I was an Olympic lifting coach. I was trained to coach, but it was hard to do it for yourself. I knew what I needed to do, but until I got someone that was watching me and helping me, that's when I got a lot better. So be humble and find someone that's better than you, or maybe not even better than you, but better at teaching you than yourself. And it can really help you take your game to the next level.
What would you say to someone who is contemplating hiring you? I need a coach. I don't know how to go about this. They may have some reservations and apprehension. What would you tell them?
Give it a shot. For hiring a coach, for trying new things. I mean, I see a lot in sleep. There are all these strategies to get better sleep. And it's easy to see them and be like, that won't work for me. That won't work for me. That won't work for me, without even trying them. And, when hiring a coach, myself or anyone else, like, try it. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? You have someone, they're not a good fit, and you're kind of in the same place. Maybe you get a nugget or two. And I think that's it. I don't think you're ever going to find someone that's going to have all the answers, but I don't know. I've been to some really bad training courses. I've had some bad coaches. I've had really good coaches, but even the bad coaches, like, I seek, like, what are the one or two things I can learn from them? Every moment's a learning opportunity. And I think being open-minded is the best thing you can do. Because as soon as you close that mind, you might not see it. I've been there, like, right out of my master's program. I thought I knew everything. I went to a training program. One of the coaches said one thing that I viewed as incorrect. And for the next 2 days, I just shut down. It was like, well, he doesn't even know how many reps to do for hypertrophy. Now, he wasn't necessarily wrong, but it was, whatever. It doesn't matter. But had I just let that moment go and been open-minded, I may have learned a little more. Going back to your question, is just give it a shot. I mean, in any of these moments, like, if you give it a try, maybe it works for you, and tomorrow you're a better person, or you get a better night's sleep. If we go back to my sleep example, but if you don't try it, you're going to likely be the same as you were today.
We appreciate your time, your insights, letting us understand the power of moments, how we should probably put more respect on recovery, and how we optimize ourselves. Are there any final thoughts or words you'd like to share in this moment?
thinking back to the things we talked, and it was fun. Like, we had a lot of good moments, but the pod analogy for stress, like what are the things that you're putting in, even if they're unrelated? If you're a parent and you have kids, be mindful of how much you're giving them in a given moment. There's so much pressure on them to begin with. And then they're playing multiple sports. They're taking high level classes. They're doing this and that, getting ready for college, and let them be kids. I think every parent would go back and say, like, man, some of the best times of my life were when I was doing this in high school or this and that. Let them enjoy it. And for yourself, it's be great. Give yourself grace, learn to say no. And sometimes it goes back. We have the best expectations or the best intentions, but it doesn't always be realistic as well. I can think of my Saturdays where it's like, oh, I could do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And then one thing goes off and then the rest of your day is a failure. I've learned if I think something's going to take an hour, budget 2 hours. Give yourself some grace there because it always takes longer than you think.
Always, always. Where can our audience connect with you and learn more about you?
LinkedIn is something I'm on here and there. I'm getting back into Instagram. Dr. Alexander Chriest is my handle. And I'm taking a transition because I was doing a lot in the corporate world. I'm transitioning more into the parent look. So you'll see a lot more things coming in the near future. But again, I've taken my own advice and not get stuck in the planning phase. I mean, there's so many times where I'm like, oh, I'm going to post this video. I'm going to do this. Well, is it good enough? Whether you like him or not, go look at Joe Rogan's first podcast. Go find that on YouTube and watch it. And he's one of the highest paid podcasters. Someone would say he's one of the best. He's very good at what he does. Look at his first one. It wasn't great. It's not like he just woke up one day and was a great podcaster. Go back and look at some of these early iterations of people's things and realize it doesn't have to be perfect.
Well, we appreciate you, Dr. A, and we're going to follow you and support you in everything you're doing. So thank you being on the Coaching Corner.
I appreciate you having me. Look forward to some more of this.